Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tech Radar webinar for Volume 33. This is our Western edition. Welcome to everyone for joining us. My name is Christopher Hastings. I'm your moderator for today's webinar, and I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Nimisha Asthagiri and Alessio Ferri. I'm going to have both of them introduce themselves. Nimisha, can we start with you?
Hey everybody, glad to be here. My name is Nimisha. I also just go by Nim. I'm based here in Boston, in Massachusetts. Glad to be here. I've been at Thoughtworks for about 4 years. Had past roles as consulting CTO, chief architect. Most recently, now I'm just really helping our Thoughtworks clients with their data and AI strategy and architecture.
And Alessio.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alessio Ferri. I'm based in London, but although today I'm in the ThoughtWorks offices in Milan, visiting my colleagues here. I'm a developer here at ThoughtWorks. I'm a lead consultant. I specialize in enterprise platform modernization, and for the past year and a half, I've been specializing on how to apply AI to accelerate the modernization of legacy systems. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Welcome. Before we dive into today's topics, I want to start with those who are maybe new to what the Take Radar is. So it started internally for us as a way for us to measure the technologies that our teams were using. And we put them out on a radar graph, and each little dot is known as a blip. And within that, we have 4 circles that come across each one of those. So at the very inner section of that is the adopt circle. That's going to be where our sensible defaults live. So we're very confident in these. We're actually strongly recommending them for the adoption by your organization and by others. Going one bubble out, we're looking at the trial. This is a strong signal from us, which means that every one of our blips that is existing in trial has been used in production somewhere internally with our teams and on some of our clients. So we have hands-on experience and can say this is a good tool to adopt and to explore. Our next ring out is assess, where we're describing this as the Wild West. We think there is something compelling here about what's interesting, and we want to give you a chance to know what that's like. And then the last one is for hold, right? This is our proceed with caution ring, where we see some flaws, but we want to share that experience and say, we're not sure you should move forward. If you've already been using this, there may be some cause for consideration and reflection there, but that's where we're going to start. And then within this tech radar and these 4 rings, we've got 4 cross sections, right? One is going to be about platforms. The other is tools and techniques, tools and techniques, and then we're going to finish up with languages and frameworks. So from there, that's where we're going to start. To begin, we're going to talk today about a couple of things for Volume 33. Specifically, it's dominated by the big conversation around agentic workflows and the ecosystem of tools and protocols that are springing up around them. We've got critical AI anti-patterns that we're seeing, and we're going to have some conversations about what the practical use cases for Gen AI and software development looks like, and finishing up with a bit of a perspective on open standards. So to start with our first major theme, I'm going to hand it over to Alessio to talk about the agentic ecosystem. Alessio, take us away.
Thank you, Christopher. I guess in the last edition of the Radar, AI had already an important presence in our publication, and I think we're seeing the same pattern repeating this year. For the past months, the AI ecosystem has matured, and especially as we people learned more ways we could harness this technology for good. I recall the last Radar, we had 2 themes around generative AI. We had the retrieval part in RAG, and we had also supervised agents in coding assistance. Whilst what we see this year is we're seeing agents and the ecosystem surrounding agents growing at a very incredible pace. Many were the blips that fell under this specific theme, and therefore the conversation that we had in the room was very much focused on this. As Christopher said, we're seeing loads of agent frameworks that pop up from anywhere. We're seeing protocols when it comes to how do we build complex agentic workflows with potentially more than one agent in the picture, how we also standardize, for example, UI and agents, how that interface looks. And of course, all of these protocols that are coming up are being adopted very quickly because really no framework wants to be left behind. So adoption is really high, and this is of course accelerated even further, as the theme name says, by the rise of MCP. In the past few months, we've seen pretty much any vendor adding MCP, exposing their capabilities through MCP. And if you think about it, it does make sense, right? Because it helps us build agents faster and really about connecting them to sources and tools they can execute to perform the actions they need to do. So I'm gonna hand it over to Nim, who's gonna kick us off with a blip related to agent frameworks.
Thanks, Alessio. And one of the things I want to say is that when we are working to develop and build out this Thoughtworks Technology Radar, right, it is all based on things that we are seeing on the ground. So it's based on ground truth of our own experiences of our thought workers working, right, with our clients. We receive like 200 or so proposals. We dwindle it down to about 100 or so for you all, for our readers. And here, what you're seeing is what we've been having experience with in terms of frameworks, right, for building these agents and building LLMs, right, on top of LLMs, LangGraph and Pydantic AI. And this is an exciting time, really, to be part of the Doppler team and working through this, because you're seeing this rapid movement, right, through our radar, where LangGraph, we had just published it in trial in April earlier this year, and now we're moving it to adopt, right? I mean, it's perfect timing as well. LangGraph 1.0, it just got, their major version was just released last week, along with their LangChain 1.0 was also released. So it's in that family of like the Lang family of open source technology related to AI. Specifically, what LangGraph and Pydantic, right, AI, what they are orchestration frameworks. LangGraph specifically has these low-level primitives with nodes and edges to really help you manage any complicated agent topologies and workflows that you have. It has a modular design, which is excellent. So our thought workers are really appreciating this, and it's great. One of its best features is state management. So it's really for stateful multi-agent architectures. It has this concept of checkpoints. So it's snapshots. It creates a graph, and that graph is updated after each step. It has a short-term memories and long-term memories that also is part of its framework, right? So every thread that you maintain of your conversation history with chat threads, right? Those are maintained within its framework, and then it has long-term memory as well. One of the great things I also liked about LangGraph is also that it cites academic papers. That's one of the other trends that we're seeing, where a lot of these technologists, where there's this confluence of like what's happening in the academic industry as well as in the commercial industry and coming together. For them specifically, they're using cognitive architectures for language agents that came out of Princeton, so the Koala paper, and they're really referencing that to think through the memory architecture. Um, but now going into Pydantic AI. Now, Pydantic AI, that's built on the widely adopted Pydantic library. So for Pydantic, right, that's an open source library from the Python ecosystem, and it has its core strength in data validation, type safety, and things like that. And now we're bringing that into the generative AI development. So you got these type safe agents that really help create this agentic framework that built from the ground up with type safety. So this too, they had their version 1.0 released also just last month in September. So a lot of these things are really developing, and you're seeing this transformation and the movement, in our radar. Pydantic right now, we're keeping it in trial. We got some early feedback from our thought workers of in the learning curve was a little bit higher, but still they've been working hard in improving their developer experience as well. So both of these, they're committed to AI stability because of their 1.0 releases, and they are continuing to keep up with the standards, integrating with MCP, A2A, open telemetry, and so forth. So moving on to the next set of blips in this area, right? We have MEM0. Now, what we're also seeing right on the ground is this need for all those POCs that we've created, right, for agents and AI work in the last year in 2024, now in 2025, really the surgence of how do we make them production ready. So Mem0 is a toolkit that you can put in your tool belt for moving these agents into production. And really what this supports is to help address the issue of agents that forget, right? Forget things across sessions. So plus it also helps with performance bottlenecks because of limited context windows. Essentially what Mem0 provides, it's a memory compression engine. So it extracts the most relevant facts from your chat history. And then they're boasting things like cost savings from token usage, like to 90%, and so forth. So it really has this capability of self-improving memory. It itself uses an LLM to extract any salient facts from conversations that you have, like in the chat history, and then it intelligently decides, okay, what is the memory that we want to retain, update, delete, and so forth based on that. One of the great advantages, and this is why also it's really great for production, path to production, is it also has results where we're finding that it's improving accuracy of the responses as well, because now the retrieval is also smarter because the memory that we provide to LM is now very constrained to what really matters. So much more meaningful memory there. So, and then the next set of blips in the same theme also about moving our AI agents to make them a lot more production grade. These are toolkits that we can also put in our tool belts for including for creating AI-ready data in our data pipelines, right? So the first one is Azure AI Doc Intelligence coming from Microsoft, and it allows you to extract text and tables and key value pairs from unstructured documents and transforming that to structured data. So it itself uses some pre-trained deep learning models. It interprets the layouts and semantics. We found this to be very useful, for instance, in our life science clients, where we have plethora of unstructured documents from decades, non-standard, and using something like Azure AI Doc Intelligence allows us to extract the structured data, then to feed into our AI, language models, as well as into our pipelines. And with ADI, it's compared to OCR technologies of the past, right? With ADI, it's also able to capture structure and relationships along with the text. That makes it a lot more robust. In contrast, if you look at DocLink is actually a computer vision-based approach to interpret those document layouts and semantic structures. So instead of feeding the vision language model directly of your page images, right, it does this vision-based approach. DocLink is also open source, and it's also built on that custom Pydantic-based data model that we just spoke about earlier. And it plug and plays with the architecture as well with LangGraph and the ecosystem. Now, both of these tools, right, because they could be costly in terms of having latency in bringing them into synchronous workflows when users are integrating with your LLMs. Instead, you would do this like as pre-processing data steps into your RAG pipelines. There are other technologies that we didn't blip this time, but Amazon TextTrack and Google Document AI, those are other vendors also playing in that same space. So hopefully that gives you guys a snapshot of what the types of tools that we're seeing, really to try to bring our production, create these production-ready AI agents to market. And now I'll pass it back to Alessio to take us forward with other frameworks we're seeing.
Thank you, Nim. N8N is also another framework like LangGraph and Pydantic AI that we're using to build agents. But beyond that, it's effectively a workflow automation platform. And this is a new blip that we have in the radar this year, and we're putting it in trial as we have a numerous amount of production use cases with our clients. I think it's known out there for its strength in terms of having a lot of available integration that you can use out of the box. I think it's about like 400 or so. And it's quite flexible, even for people that are not familiar with coding, because of its drag and drop UI, you can compose your workflows through this interface. But if required, the platform itself also provides a way to extend these workflows with nodes that you can actually control through code. And so you can write your own custom Python or JavaScript code that you can embed into your workflow. So that's really flexible for many roles and personas within a team. It's also flexible in terms of how we deploy it. We've seen examples of self-hosting an A10, but also running it as a managed solution. For those who have used an A10 before in the past, this is not new. It's been around for a few years. And so you might ask, why is it appearing now in the radar for the first time? Well, it's quite relevant in today's context as we are building many agents with our clients because of its AI native capabilities. So what we talked about before, memory management, integrating with LLMs, creating these workflows that ultimately compose our agents is all constructs that are available within the n8n platform. So you can interact with LLMs, you can plug in memory into your agents. You can plug in quite easily sources of data. For example, if you're building a RAG pipeline, and you can also provide tool calling capabilities. So you can build full-fledged agents onto this platform. And we also have some interesting use cases from our teams on the ground who are using also capabilities within the platform, such as the import and export functionality to effectively build workflows using coding assistance. So workflows can be coded as JSON structures, and our teams are also experimenting with creating those workflows with coding assistants, which then get imported into the platform. So it also saves us time when it comes to, for example, producing a first pass of a workflow. And then we can tinker around the edges of that workflow and make it, putting it into the final version that we want. So this is quite interesting, n8n, and definitely something worth trying out if you're trying to build agents, but you have never built one before. Definitely the barrier is lower compared to other full-fledged code-focused frameworks. Now, onto some use cases with AI. We're putting AI for code migration in as a technique in trial in this radar. I remember specifically in the room as we were discussing this blip, a lengthy discussion around the complexity of this blip. Code migration means it's quite an umbrella, right? It means you're upgrading, for example, a framework or a library. There's many potential use cases in here. And when we are really blipping about something in the radar, we're limited to about 2 paragraphs of describing what that blip is about. And so the complexity in here is, can we really capture all the nuances of what works and what doesn't into a blip? But ultimately, through a round of voting, which is what we do in the room, we decided to actually keep this blip in the radar and not consider it as too complex to blip, because we do have actual hands-on experience that we want to call out. And regardless of other use cases of AI for code migration, we want to specifically call out what we've been doing and what learnings we've had from applying this technique on the ground. And we also ended up discussing what didn't work. For example, using AI as a silver bullet to do the entire value stream of code migration. Although it sounds really cool, in practice, it never really works. But our teams have shared with us how they approach the problem by breaking it down into smaller ones and using deterministic rule-based tooling, such as, for example, in the past, we blipped Open Rewrite to do these kind of things, using those tools wherever those tools support the code migration aspect, and then only apply AI in those places where the tools don't get you as far. And one of our teams, for example, blogged on the Thoughtworks blog, public blog, about their experience in using this approach to upgrade the .NET version that they had at a specific client. But also there's other resources out there. For example, I think in the last year, Slack published a blog post where they talked about how they migrated from Enzyme to React testing library using a mixture of AST rule-based conversions and AI as well. I think there is one caveat to this, which is we are not really sure in terms of how much does it reduce effort from a developer's perspective, because really the data that we're seeing is very mixed. So it's hard to say 30%, 50%. But what we're seeing definitely is that applying this technique is saving us time, and how much really depends on the context and the problem that you're trying to solve. But this is definitely something worth exploring if your team is doing something like this. Another technique that we're blipping is using generative AI to understand legacy code bases. This is something that we already had in the radar, but it's a moving to adopt. And I think what this really does is reflect that, as Christopher said before, when we move something into adopt, it's effectively a sensible default for our teams. Primarily, we use the radar as well internally within Thoughtworks. So when we look for a specific technology or technique, and we look at the radar, if we see something as adopt, that's a really strong message internally within the company. And this is really what our teams are doing. Whenever there is a legacy system complex to understand, then we can use generative AI because it saves us effort. Out there in the market, there is really a plethora of tools. And we've also built our own internally at Thoughtworks to solve some of the challenges that we see with clients. And what typically happens in the radar is when we have many blips that fall under a common technique, instead of blipping each one of them, we blip the technique itself and we mention the tools within the technique. Like for the previous blip, it's quite hard to generalize how much time generative AI saves us. But wherever we've applied this technique, we've always had evidence back that shows that it's an effective technique to help us navigate complexity when we're dealing with a large code basis. And this is also a topic that's very close to my heart, because I've been doing this for a year and a half, and I think it's particularly relevant today because if you think of it, as we're using coding assistants, the throughput of lines of code added that we have in our code bases is increasing very fast. And we need tools in our toolbox that can help us deal with this problem. So I think it's really important that we also focus on trying to use AI to understand code, not only to write it. And I think it's this statement that I'm saying is backed up by a GitClear 2025 report that they published on AI code quality, which does show that added lines of code and churned lines of code, meaning those lines that have been added and changed soon after, those are increasing much faster than we had before. But at the same time, the lines of code that are being moved, which typically signifies refactoring, are dropping. So having something like this, having a technology, knowing that we have that technology in our back pocket, I think is quite important for us as an industry. Moving on to the next blip, we have generative AI for forward engineering. This is a new technique that we have in Assess that we've been experimenting with. It's effectively about modernizing legacy systems through providing descriptions of what a code base does, what a legacy code base does to forward engineering agents. We also have another blip in the radar called spec-driven development, which is something that's been out there for a while now. So you can think of it as almost like spec-driven development, but applied to legacy systems and their modernization. How this workflow works is effectively about introducing a step in that modernization workflow that describes what the code does. And when we do so, we deliberately hide the implementation details of that code. When we do so, though, we don't do it with the goal of actually hiding or obscuring that implementation detail, but it's so that we can have a temporary abstraction in between that really helps our teams, and of course our teams using agents at the same time, reason through the problem space and exploring alternatives rather than just jumping specifically to an implementation detail. So what that workflow looks like is we typically reverse engineer the code, and then we design and solutionize what we want that modernization output to look like, and then we forward engineer it. And we are seeing that when we do so, humans and AI work really well together because it does promote collaboration between us and the AI. The AI is really helping us grasp very large concerns that the legacy code base is implementing at a level that we can actually reason through it, because we don't need to deal with hundreds of thousands of lines of code, but we can abstract it to something at a much higher level and reason through the problem space at that level, and then later commit to an implementation. So this is quite an interesting use case that we are currently trying out with a few clients.
And I love hearing talk about Alessio, because I know those things are so close to your heart and you're investing a lot of time on that for our clients. And so, yeah, awesome. Now, to close out this particular theme, I wanted to share this experience and these blips around it. And as Alessio said, right, there's techniques that we blip as well as tools, right, that might be supporting those techniques. V0, we blipped that previously, and now we're moving it to trial, so re-blipping that. But what is this? What are we talking about? This particular technique is about when we're talking about creating these AI agents, right, to help with your own business workflows inside, also for your customer experiences and externally, and also for AIFSD, so AI for software development, a lot of those blips that Alessio just talked about, right? Well, but when we're talking about building AI agents and the UI and the user experience for it, in order to really have that be adopted, in that path to production that we were talking about, it is very critical to get feedback, right, as early as you can on those experiences. So what we are finding is that the technique is using tools like, let's say, V0, but also just Claude and Claude Code or Figma Make or Miro AI, right? These are all tools that non-technical members of your team, they can create these prototypes that very rapidly, that are throwaway, but get immediate feedback from your users. And this way, your teams, they can iterate quickly with speed, but with adoption first mindset, with usability in mind. And what these tools do, that they actually create not just wireframes, but actually functional HTML, CSS, JavaScript, right? So, and within minutes, and you get this feedback, you put it in front of your users, and you get ability to understand, is this the right path? So these are things that we're now finding our own product managers. They're not requesting developers to do this, like product managers are maybe in a user requirements journey, research journey session with users, and right then and there, they're able to, hey, is this what you mean? Hey, what do you guys think about this? We are finding this globally throughout our, it was great because our colleagues in China and in Thailand, like people were bringing up, they were like, so this was a blip that didn't take too long to convince people, because everyone was seeing it across the globe. So that was excellent. And even in the States, we're using this technique. And V0, like I said, so that's the AI tool for generating these front end code. You can give it a screenshot in addition to text. You could give it a Figma design if you want, and then it will also generate React, Vue, or Tailwind or other front end code for you. UX Pilot, on the other hand, that's more maybe for the UX design process. So it supports your stages through that design process, everything from wireframing to be able to create those more high fidelity visual designs. But that too also accepts images or text and can automatically generate screens and flows. So yeah, no longer needing to wait too long to be able to get that feedback, especially with, we're thinking about design for AI. So, what could that look like? Yeah.
So thanks, Nimisha. I think all of this talk of using AI to move forward on forward engineering and legacy code bases sets us up for the question of, tell us about our next theme. What are the emerging AI anti-patterns that we're seeing as we are drawn in to use it on every sort of software, every part of the software development lifecycle?
Yeah, Christopher, like we're all very excited, right, about like leveraging AI. And it's initially there might be a fear of missing out type of mentality, and now everyone has gotten a chance to, or not everyone, but I want to say, like, we're seeing, right, this trend of, people taking a stab at this, and there are definitely initial immediate benefits that people see, but then there's like, wait a minute. moments that come forth when you're thinking about this. Oh, wait, it's starting to hallucinate, or, is it actually more verbose than we want it to be in terms of the code generation that happens? We're seeing also in the chat too, people are talking about, hey, those large context windows aren't able to keep up with the code that is generated. How might this work? So these are things where you do need to think through, and we do believe that, we're expecting to see more anti-patterns also emerge. So really there's long-term implications of our work that we have to be mindful for. Even something like spec-driven development, right, which we were blipping in this edition, but we're noticing that, embracing things like spec-driven development could still revert us to traditional software engineering anti-patterns, like for instance being bias towards having this upfront specification and big bang releases. So we have to just, be mindful of that. And I think you'll see in some of the blips in this theme, it's once again those reminders of our learnings from the past. Let's bring them forward even in the realm of AI. Now, one of these things, and remember what Alessio said, hold is a very strong statement for us. It is saying like proceed with caution. It's not necessarily don't ever do it at times, but it's really more like, hey, proceed with your eyes wide open. And one of these things as an anti-pattern we're seeing is this notion of, hey, let's put an MCP layer, right, on top of our already existing AI, or I mean APIs that exist. This, what we're calling it, is as this naive API to MCP conversion. Why we're putting this is on hold is that when we build things for human consumption, they don't necessarily should be necessarily fed directly to machines, right? So a human agent and machine agent, with a human agent, you are thinking about these REST APIs and the composition of it, and you're able to think that through. Whereas for with machine agents, just putting it a naive MCP layer on it, it doesn't allow for the semantic translation and the logical a way of thinking about leveraging those APIs. And that could then actually lead to poor performance for your agents. So that's one thing that we recommend, to really proceed with caution. And similarly, in the next blip, we're calling this text to SQL. Now, text to SQL, we're putting this on hold as well. We're not saying like talk to data, which is a big trend right now. We're not saying that on hold as much as this, similarly, this naive, hey, let's go ahead and now just have, a prompt that a user provides directly execute SQL code. We're saying, hey, proceed with caution on that. And really, we're discouraging the use of unsupervised workflows. So perhaps having, once again, an abstraction layer in between, that could be a GraphQL layer, MCP layer, right? A semantic layer in between that ensures that the text is properly getting translated to the SQL execution that you do want underneath. So I'll pass it on to Alessio, who'll tell a little bit more about the GraphQL aspect.
One point to add on that previous text to SQL, I have used in the past, and I'm sure there's many people out there that, for example, construct SQL queries with AI, and that's perfectly valid, right? But just wanted to emphasize on that fact that this is about having an agent autonomously execute SQL queries, right? It might sound great because of the flexibility of the data that it can pull back, but actually the blip that we're about to talk about now, GraphQL as a data access pattern for LLMs, this is addressing some of those challenges that we see in the text to SQL, executing SQL queries directly from an agent. And this is a technique it's a new technique that we have in the radar that we're putting in Assess. It's all about exposing, enabling teams and with that these teams are building to expose structured queryable data by an LLM, with the flexibility of accessing directly the schema on the SQL schema underneath, but with the controls that we can have at a GraphQL layer and the decoupling as well from the actual underlying database. So when, for example, you're building an agent, and you are accessing data through a REST layer, what we see typically is that REST might overfetch data. It might just get much more than what actually the agent needs. And when we are so much concerned about the performance of the agent, we are concerned about how we manage the context, what information is going into that agent. So for us, overfetching data that the model actually doesn't need to perform the action it needs to do, that sounds like a smell, right? And so the typical approach when we use REST is we implement filters, or maybe we change the APIs to make them more agent friendly. And that happens, even when we talked about naive API conversions to MCP, that's exactly the same thing. It's about not having put enough thought on designing the context that goes into an LLM. And even if we allow, for example, for calls to be filtered and so forth at a REST layer, we might still have agents performing multiple calls in sequence to APIs, and that might be hard for a model to manage that sequence. GraphQL instead lets the model really fetch the data that it needs. So the powerful aspect about it is that through leveraging the GraphQL schema and metadata about that schema, it allows the agent to think about the entities that are available in that schema and how these entities are connected through relationships, and really powering up opportunities to have dynamic querying of the data that the agent has access to or can tap into. So in a sense, this is almost like a middle ground option of REST on one end, and on the other end, we've got direct access to the database. But it does provide those, it does balance governance concerns and security as well with flexibility. So this is something that's quite powerful when we're building agents, and we're finding it quite powerful. One thing to add, though, is, of course, beware of the complexity of the schema, because if the GraphQL schema is complex, then it's quite difficult for a model to derive from the data, the semantic of that data. Then putting GraphQL in front of it will not really enable the agent to do better. So of course, carefully designing the schema and the data that we want to expose to the models is as well part of context engineering. It's still, as you can see, many times content engineering comes up in this call, but it did come up as well in the meeting face-to-face when we were producing the radar. So this is definitely a concern that we have when we tap into data from models and agents. And also the typical downsides that we have with GraphQL, for example, the caching aspect or versioning APIs, these are still there. So these are not addressed. Another belief that we have is service mesh without sidecar. Now, we had this already back in 2022, and it was in assess, and it's still in assess, but we're refreshing it. What it means, we are updating the description of the blip. Now, for those who build service meshes, effectively, they typically work with a sidecar proxy, which is typically Envoy. This handles security, observability, network traffic, and so forth. And it's great, but when the architecture scales, then the overhead also scale as well. And we have increased usage in CPU, maintenance, more moving parts in the system that we have to care about, and memory as well. And the reason why we're refreshing this in the radar is because not long ago, I think about a year ago, Istio announced the ambient mode as generally available, and we've got experience with clients using this. Our teams have got experience doing that, and it's yet another way of implementing a service mesh, but without using the concept of one sidecar per pod. So the ambient mode introduces effectively a layered architecture. We've got one pod at the node level, one proxy at the node level, which is a zero trust proxy built in Rust, and it handles the layer 4. And then we can have also an optional proxy at the namespace level, and that handles layer 7. So we can get like security policies, observabilities, and so forth. But that also is optional. So it removes that overhead of having one proxy per pod. It's quite a powerful thing, especially when the architecture scales. And this approach keeps growing, right? We're seeing stuff that comes out that supports this technique. So we definitely wanted to update the description to make sure it covers what's happening in today's industry.
Remember, this is just a sneak preview, right, of the radar that's coming out very shortly. So you guys are only getting a few of the blips as a snapshot of things that we wanted to bring in today. But so there's more to come, and this is the last one, like in this theme of, anti-patterns. This one we debated about. Okay, so this one we did talk about, like, okay, is this going to get um how will this be received by our reader? Remember that we do want to bring forth things that we're actually experiencing. And so why we did end up publishing this is because we are experiencing this. We are experiencing the issues with having these standalone data engineering teams in an organization. What we mean by that is data engineering teams that are separate from the business domain teams, or the business teams that are actually stream aligned, right, in team topology terms, right, that they're actually delivering the value for the business. And then you have instead these centralized data teams that are being asked to create data products, or being asked to, create the models and so forth. But those centralized teams do not have necessarily the business context, and they become bottlenecked. And at the end of the day, what's happening is you then still have these long lead times, bottlenecks, plus at the end of the day, what is being built is not necessarily exactly what the business needs. So the quality also suffers in addition to lead time. Why this was important for us to bring up, and we talked about this, and we were saying, hey, well, in reality, a lot of organizations aren't structured this way. And we went through, right, Alessio, feel free to chime in here, but we went through, we were like, yes, it's true, but it is an anti-pattern. And it's analogous to past blips from years ago where we said, hey, let's not have, like we were bringing forth DevOps as a notion and the value of that, right, as opposed to what we were doing before with developers and ops, separated, or like a QA function was separated from the rest of your team. And now we're seeing more cross-functional teams. So that's been a good trend in the industry. But data, for some reason, is still isolated. And now with the advent of AI and the need for quality data, this was one of the reasons we're like, well, let's bring this up. We're seeing this as an anti-pattern. It is slowing down our clients, and it's slowing down the meaningful work that we like to do as a result. So wanted to share that here as well. It's a way to close out our anti-pattern theme. Things that might be hard to change in an organization. This is not something you could change overnight, but there could be a path towards it, and things that we do with also our data modernization efforts for our clients. So.
Thanks, Nimisha. For those paying attention, we're going to release our new volume of the Tech Radar on the 5th, which is 1 week from today. So on it, you'll be able to see all 114 blips, of which this is a small preview. Now, when we do a radar, we normally pick a couple of themes that we address. And what we're going to talk about now is open standards. It didn't quite make the level of a theme, but it is so consistently an undercurrent for us as a team and as an organization that we wanted to make sure that we talked about a couple of the blips that were important to us, and one of the blips that was too complex to blip. So for that, I'm going to kick it over to Alessio to maybe start us off with ORPC.
Thank you, Christopher. ORPC is a new tool that we have in Assess in the radar. And actually, very recently, it's announced its B1 version to the public. So it's very exciting to see that committing to the stability of their API. ORPC effectively is all about providing end-to-end type safe APIs in TypeScript, but also adhering to standards like OpenAPI specifications. And part of the tool itself is about streamlining what the OpenAPI documentation looks like. So we build the code, we write the code, and then that documentation can be automatically generated by the tool itself for us. And the feedback from our teams is really positive on this, because through the adapters that it provides, it becomes very easy to make the port to a type-safe API with some of the most popular Node.js frameworks that exist out there. And a very interesting concept is also this promotion of a contract-first flow, where effectively both the provider, API provider, and consumer, they agree on a contract which is defined through the tool itself and can be shared amongst these two teams. And the teams then can, in parallel, build on their implementation. So it's yet another way of tightening that feedback loop and establishing conversation between these teams, agreeing on what that API should look like, and define that contract so that then we can go into implementing that. So I think it's very interesting. We've seen other tools and frameworks promote this, and it's great to see that this keeps happening. And I guess that's it for RPC. Another technique that we have in the radar is this concept of agents MD. And we call it agents MD, although it doesn't only cover the file agents MD that we see in code bases out there. We call it, though, agents MD as the technique behind providing instructions to agents, to coding assistants within our repositories. So the way it's marketed out there, this open format for instructions, is that effectively it's almost like providing a README, but for agents. And what it typically contains is, useful instructions that the agent can run, or tips about coding standards within the code base. So the agent can refer to these, and the agents themselves, some of them have been built so that they look for these files so they can find this information and pull it when it's necessary. In our head, this is yet another implementation of context engineering. It's about providing valuable insights as part of an agentic workflow. And because the format is very flexible, it means that it's also very easy to adopt it. But not all coding assistants are following this agents MD structure. For example, Claude Code uses Claude MD, but the concept is exactly the same. So we want to flip the technique. Of course, one day we'd hope that these would consolidate. The value, really, if you think about this, is about having very simple conventions that the team shares between them. So we also have another blip in the radar called curated shared instruction for software teams. And this is effectively about that, but specifically for a software development world. And it's great to see that when something works for a team, for one person in the team, there is now a codified standard that we can put these instructions in there and help other people in the team leverage those same prompts and instructions that we're working with. Another blip that we have in the radar is Open Feature. This is a new platform that we're blipping about, and it's in assess. And it's a platform that provides standardizations in a vendor agnostic way for how feature toggles are being defined and consumed in our applications. Now, feature toggles have been out there for long. So you might ask, why now? And we have decided to blip Open Feature because coupling to feature toggle solutions, management solutions, is still a problem that we see with many of our clients. And if we see it with many of our clients, then it means that it's relevant in today's world, especially as many organizations are looking to be more cost efficient and rationalize the set of solutions that they have. Maybe they have more than one feature toggle management solution. And so having the code decoupled to the actual implementation of that feature toggle management is quite handy, especially as our organizations are going through that rationalization. The platform helps you both manage, define, and consume very basic toggles, like, for example, environment variables. But it also helps you get through the management and consumption of toggles through platforms, full-fledged platforms like Config.cat and Launch Darkly. So it's pretty well rounded, and the team are giving really positive feedback about this.
And similarly, in this open standards, aspect of things, open inference is another one. Open inference, we put this in assess, and it's analogous or it's complementary to open telemetry, right? Where we're seeing open inference specifically for observing AI applications where open telemetry, right, is observability for regardless for any application. With open inference, right, we have standard instrumentation for machine learning frameworks and libraries. And really, it will help developers trace LLM invocations, right? So, like, especially for vector store retrievals, or if they're calling external tools and API search engines and so forth. So, this once again is like it's really showing also one of the reasons I love talking about these open standards, right, is that there's a lot of interoperability in the industry, and we're seeing that emergence, and especially with the rapid changes that are happening, being and playing in the open arena, right, allows us to be able to plug and play and continue to build on top of it. So there's been adoption of open telemetry across the industry, and we're hoping open inference also gets adopted. And one of the reasons we want to blip it for visibility for everybody. And then the next blip is similarly for visibility, just wanted to share. But this blip actually was deemed too complex to blip. Sometimes in these webinars, we do share things that actually didn't make it on. As Alessio referenced earlier, our blips, they have to be like, we want to have that to be short and sweet within a paragraph. And sometimes it's just too complicated to put something in that short and sweet form. So we might have a podcast or article about it. But for visibility, thought, just share this very quickly on this webinar. Really simple licensing, right? So this is an open standard that's emerging, and it's to allow publishers on the web, so basically to protect your content rights in the AI era. So that allows us to be able to have machine readable licensing terms for your content. So this way, you could get paid for crawl, paid for inference, basically for any attribution. And RSL has an open licensing protocol, so it eliminates any manual negotiations or integrations that you would need to have with the large technology companies. So just wanted to share this. This was developed by the founders of RSS. And wanted to share this also as something that might be emerging for visibility. This is not like robots.txt, which is voluntary. This would be an automated negotiation, and there's a community that's being built around this. So that's our last blip, I believe. Yes, Christopher, for today.
Yeah, no, this is our last blip. So thank you. This has been a great conversation so far. If we have questions, let's drop them into the chat and we'll see what we can do with some of the time that we have left. You may need to, if you want everybody to see it, you may need to specifically mention and use that drop down and move it from just the panelists to everyone. I'm happy to have that conversation while we're waiting for any questions to come in. Nimisha and Alessio, let me ask you this. So in terms of what's left on the cutting room floor from being in the room with Tech Radar, too complex to blip. A lot of topics go there. The other one is the ones that don't get voted through to the successive rounds. And one of the things that a lot of people don't know is about the concept of a lifeboat, which means that you have one idea that you're passionate about that maybe got cold in an earlier session that you want to bring back. And my question for each of you is, did you have a lifeboat? And if so, what was it? Nimisha, maybe I start with you. I think you maybe had some fire around this one.
Oh my gosh, I'm trying to remember. Yes, I can't remember exactly. I think maybe text to SQL. Can't remember if that was exactly a lifeboat or not, but it definitely was one of those, right, that went back and forth. And we wanted to make sure that text to SQL did not get misinterpreted. Once again, that was one that was put on hold, so proceed with caution. And we wanted to make sure that it was clear for people that we're not saying not to have text to SQL eventually. It's just direct, connection from text to SQL. Yeah.
Alessio, did you have a lifeboat?
Oh, I think I had two blips that I was really, really passionate about. And there is also this concept of blipiciding that blip, meaning you actually think it's not going to make it through, so you automatically by yourself decide to put that on the side and not present it at all in the meeting. And I had two, and I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to blipicide one and keep the other. But then the other one was killed as well, meaning I had none of the two blips that I wanted. If I remember correctly, this was Gen AI for forward engineering. And when I live voted it, you also need to provide like a reason, of course, why you think that's really important, right? You need to try and sway the room. And yeah, it's in the radar. Actually, we presented it today, so I'm very passionate about that topic, I think.
Fantastic. Well, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, so I think we can wrap up here. But I wanted to say thank you to both of our panelists today, Nimisha and Alessio. You guys have done fantastic. We've covered agentic ecosystems and the rise of legacy modernization, AI anti-patterns. I think this is a really important time, and I think we are just getting started. So
And
thank you for your time.
there are some questions in the Q&A, though. I don't know
Oh,
if
what's that?
Christopher take that. And there was one
Oh,
that
okay.
was suggesting, there was a question about standalone data engineering teams, and
Yeah.
are they part of the product teams, or can they be? And for that, just very quickly, I wanted to share that
Please.
the idea behind putting that on hold was that you have these data engineering teams that are separated, not connected to the business value. And so the idea is that, yes, we would have data engineers actually embedded cross-functionally inside your product teams. And, data scientists, data engineers, as it would make sense. So sorry, Christopher, sorry, I was extending that. And
No,
there
that's great. I hadn't that there was another panel behind a panel, so I hadn't seen some of these.
Yeah,
And
and there's
so
good interest around like Gen AI and using that for the code bases. So Alessio, you had a few interests
Yeah,
yeah, it
around.
looks like there is a question here, and we can go ahead and take it and run out our clock. But Alicia, what tools are we using to analyze our legacy code bases?
yeah. I mean, in reality, there are so many out there, and the reason why I didn't call them out before is really because there are many. But in the blip description, you will see that understanding code bases starts from, for example, sharing the code with a model and asking questions on that. So it can be really basic to solutions that use graphs and knowledge graphs, or other solutions that will index the entire code base and provide back summaries through those indices. So the tools, for example, you could use a coding assistant for it as well. I have used and other teams have used, for example, Cursor or Cloud Code to explain legacy code bases. Although there is actually another question out there, which is, once the code becomes too large, then wouldn't that actually prevent the LLM to be able to understand that code? And that's spot on. And that's actually why internally at Thoughtworks, we have also built our own tool to deal with that problem, right? So this is definitely something that we are seeing. And that's why I said before, I'm very passionate about this topic, because it's important that we do have these tools in our back pocket. So
And if
I
you remember, Alessio, there was a blip that didn't make it, and I forget exactly what we called it, but there was a statement there about a technique to refactor the code base every few weeks. Do you remember that? So it's like Gen AI created code bases and refactoring. So I think there's going to be some emerging techniques to try to, keep the code base, AI friendly. We did have a blip in the past about AI friendly code bases and really having that modularity and so forth, but also techniques for refactoring continuously to help with that. Yeah.
Yeah, almost like I remember it was about formalizing that as part of actually a ceremony that we do every 10 commits or so. We say, okay, now let's take
Yeah.
back control over this code base, make sure that it's growing the right way. Yeah, I think that
Yes.
was very interesting, but I don't remember if it was too complex to bleed, because definitely getting the message in 2 paragraphs can be quite challenging. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay,
And I
let's
can
see.
see like this is an inside preview of like, just like us. It's great conversations we had this time around. A lot happening with AI technologies, and a lot needing to be figured out in terms of emerging techniques, anti-patterns, and so forth. So, yeah.
Okay. I think we are now at time. So let me say, Nimisha and Alessio, thank you so much again. To our audience, thank you so much for your questions and participation in chat. We're excited to releasing the radar to you next Wednesday on November 5th, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.